Hello again, and welcome to episode 2 of War Stories, tales from behind the scenes, from the front lines of the media. I'm your host, Tom Curley, and I can prove it because I've got my own lower third. There we go. I'm also the host of the hysterically funny podcast, Get Off My Lawn. This is our second show, and once again, I'm more than thrilled to welcome back Garry Armstrong, the one, the only, the veteran TV broadcaster. So, Garry, how you doing this week?
Oh, I'm doing fine. We have no snow on the ground, and temperatures are pretty decent for this time of the year.
Yeah, exactly. Which sort of leads us into the first story that I want to talk about. The topic this week, which will be a topic over many weeks, is disasters. Not just disasters that we cover, but the
Yeah.
disasters that go on behind the scenes. And one of the things I've always gotten a kick out of, and I have to ask, during your career, I'm sure that you were one of those poor schmuck reporters who is the guy that has to stand
Oh,
out
yeah.
up
Oh,
to his
yeah.
knees in the surf during a hurricane, telling people that it's a stupid idea to go out and stand in the surf during a hurricane. Am I right?
Oh, how I lied. You know, I I have to tell you that in 22, I lose track of the time, but close to 22 years in retirement, people still recognize me, which is terrific, of course, for my ego. But when they talk about remembering watching me on television, and I keep anticipating it'll be one of the wonderful stories I covered with world leaders, world shaking event, it's usually we remember watching you in the bad weather. You looked so calm out there, and yeah, I was the bad weather reporter for Channel 7 in Boston for many years.
Was it just
It
you, or
was,
did they share the wealth?
well,
It was
the classic year was the blizzard of 78, which is the blizzard which took most of the country, um, which reminds me of, and I think it was 78. It could have been another year. It doesn't matter. They all look alike on camera. We had a, a fair amount of snow in the background. It was very cold. I had done at least a dozen or more live shots for different stations around the country. And by the time 6 o'clock rolled around prime time, I was ready and standing erect. And the reason I could stand erect is because I was cold. I was frozen cold. And I was standing by waiting for the anchor to lead into me. And we had voices screaming into my ear on what we call euphemistically the IFB, which allows the people back in the studio to talk to you into your ear. And you just stay focused on the camera, of course. And as I stood there, I realized I couldn't move my fingers. I had my hands securely wrapped around the microphone, but my face wasn't moving. And I could hear the voice saying, as I tried to manage a smile, someone was saying, Garry, smile. We have a big audience out there tonight because of the weather, and they like you. You're looking good, Garry. And I started to say something, and they said, Garry, smile. Oh, Garry, you have snot on your face. Wipe the snot off your face. And I said, but. And they said, there are no buts. I said, but I can't move my hands. My fingers are frozen. I can't do anything about the snot. And they said, we want you to wipe the snot off. Well, I didn't. I just proceeded on, and as I talked and I warmed up a little bit, the snot indeed began to move down my face. It's one of the glories of working as a blizzard reporter. So glamorous.
that is awesome. Yeah, for the folks at home, the IFB stands for, well, there's arguments. It stands for interrupted foldback or interrupted feedback, and it used to be my job as the audio guy to provide that feed to you guys. And one of the big problems there was that we had to provide a way for the control room to talk to you, but we also had to provide the output of the studio of the show so that you could hear the anchor asking you questions and talking to you. But one of the things that
Tom,
we
did you
couldn't
did,
do.
did you as you being one of those people on the other end, did you ever stop to think about what it was like when there was a dozen Tom Curleys talking to one Garry Armstrong, what it was like on the other end? You did.
I totally understand. And I
And you
used
didn't
to
care.
just, you're kidding. In the audio booth, we were laughing our butts off. I mean, that's the great thing about the producers behind the scenes. They're good at a lot of things, but what they're really good at is panicking. Absolutely panicking. And then it's contagious. If one person panics, they all panic. Great quick story. One day we were doing the morning news. It was probably back in the 80s. And on the morning news, we used to have, a lot of remotes. And it wouldn't be unusual to have 10, sometimes 17 different remotes that we would have to provide a feed to. And it would have to be a separate feed to each one, make sure that they could all hear each other, but not hear themselves, because otherwise there'd be feedback.
Exactly.
So one day, we just it was a bad day. Every remote fell apart. We couldn't get the IFB working. One station, they didn't know how to do it. Another one, the phones didn't work. And after about the 6th or 7th one that was blowing up in our faces, I said dryly, I hit the button that went to the control room to the director, and I said as a joke, gee, I hope Bill can hear Diane. It was Diane Sawyer and Bill Curtis doing the show at that time. So I hit the button and I said sarcastically, gee, I hope Bill can hear Diane. Now, they were sitting on the studio set next to each other. So all of a sudden, I hear a guy in the background going, Bill can't hear Diane. Bill can't hear Diane. Somebody crashes into the audio booth and goes, can Bill hear Diane? And he's hitting the keys to both of them. And he's going, Bill, can you hear Diane? Can you hear Diane? And you could see Bill Curtis on the air going, what? And you can see Diane going, what? And true story. So I have a disaster story. It doesn't involve the weather. Everybody has a bad day.
Of course.
And I've had many, okay? But my best bad day was, believe it or not, the very first broadcast that I ever did at the ABC radio network. Now, as we talked about last week, the network had actually 4 separate networks for different formats of radio stations. But it was really only 2 studios. So back then we had a director and an announcer and an engineer. Now the director's job was mostly to point at me, but his real job, or her real job, was to bring in the commercials on these little broadcast cartridges, which look like an 8-track tape. Now, if you don't know what an 8-track tape looks like, it looks just like a broadcast cartridge. So he would bring that, and then they would bring in the sound bites for us to play. So it was my first broadcast, and I'd been there for 2 weeks. I'm a college kid. I'm a junior in college. And so I'm ready, and I'm in the control room, and I look up, and it's 1 minute to air, and I don't have a director. I also don't have a commercial. I don't have any sound bites. But I do have a script, and I have an announcer. So being that he's older than me, and everybody older than me is my boss, I go, what are we going to do? We don't have a director. And the announcer, God bless him, he's looking at his script, and he looks up, he goes, sucks to be you, kid. And he goes back to marking up his script. So now if you remember, we had a phone, a big phone, okay, that went to the newsroom. It was like a PA system, okay? So I picked up the phone, and I said in a very calm voice, to what I thought was a calm voice, hello, this is control room. We don't have a director. We don't have any commercials. We don't have any scripts. But I think what the newsroom heard was, we don't have any director! We don't have any scripts! Ah! So by now, it was 10 seconds to air, so counted it down. What am I going to do? I hit the button, do the opening music, crossfade to the announcer, and he starts doing the show. So everything's going fine, right? Now, at this point, about 10 to 15 people come exploding into the control room, all of them shouting something different, okay? Now again, you got to understand that I was a junior in college, okay? Anybody that was older than me and had wore a tie was my boss.
Yes.
Exactly,
yes.
was my boss. So they were all screaming stuff, but one guy screamed louder than, we were coming up to the commercial, okay? And as he was saying, and we'll be back with more right after these words, a guy literally threw a cartridge across the room. I caught it. I slammed it into the cart machine. I hit the button. Did it. Still
Perfect.
doing okay. And it was a commercial. It was a commercial for Pepsodent. And it was like Pepsodent gives your mouth sex appeal. It was a popular commercial. Well, now while the commercial's on, I turned to focus on everybody yelling at me. Well, it turns out that out of the commercial, the very next story was out of Washington. It was what we called a Washington switch. And what that meant was normally everything was produced in New York, but sometimes the bureau in Washington or the bureau in L.A. would produce a piece and they wouldn't have time to feed it to New York. So what we would do was called a Washington switch, is where we had a big switch on the panel, and the director would coordinate with the director in Washington, and when it came time to play the thing, I would throw that switch. And at the exact same moment in time, the guy in Washington would throw his switch. And what that did is it would close the loop. You have to realize that the radio network, was basically just a 6,000 mile copper wire, and all the affiliates listened to it. But one person fed it, in this case, New York. But when we did that, I closed the loop, Washington opened the loop, and then Washington fed the thing. And when the soundbite was over, we did the thing in reverse and everything. Now, if that sounds kludgy and clunky, it was, but it worked. I mean,
I remember. I remember.
Well. It worked.
Yes.
So the problem was, in this case, the guy that was the loudest, he wanted to tell me that the next soundbite was out of Washington, but he didn't say the next soundbite is out of Washington. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Switch to Washington." So I did. Yeah, I did. And what I did is I basically closed a 6,000 mile loop, and it created feedback, 6,000 miles of feedback. And what you heard was ultra bright, gives your mouth sex, 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 sex. So at this point, my brain goes, well, that's not right. So I switched back. Now, in that period of time, a big red light went on in Washington. The engineer and the director jumped up out of their seats and threw their switch at the same moment that I threw mine. Now you had it opened on two spots, and the feedback just got weirder. So at this point, I have opened up every fader on the board. The commercial ends, we come back to the announcer, and we finish the show. Okay, no more disasters, except I left one fader open. It was a fader that had background music that we used to use to feed down the line so that people would know that the network was there. And so the rest of the newscast was done to the lilting strings of Mantovani. So anyway, the broadcast ends, and they all disappear. They just disappear. And there I am, sitting in a control room by myself, going, that's it. My career's over.
It's the end of your career, yes.
I'm going to get fired. The phone rings. Sure enough. Hello, Tom. The Mr. So-and-so wants to see you. I don't remember his name, but he was the vice president. He was the boss.
What were you thinking in that moment?
I was thinking, that's it. Maybe I'm going to have to go to medical school. I mean, I can't believe it. I said, I fucked up on my first broadcast? What the hell? So I go up to this guy's office, and he was a very nice guy. And he brings me in, and he goes, Tom, I just want you to know that the trouble reports for that last broadcast are filling boxes all across the country. And I sit down, and he goes, so can you tell me what happened? And I do, and I tell him, and he says, well, do you think you had enough training? I said, well, yeah, I had enough training. It's just that they all came in and they were all shouting at me. And he said, well, why didn't you throw them out? I said, what? He said, you need to understand something. When you're on the air, that's your control room. You're the boss. You can throw anybody out, including me. So I said, well, I'm fired, right? He said, no, of course not. It wasn't your fault. You didn't have a director. I never got in any trouble. I never heard from him again. But in a way, it was a blessing because I was never nervous on the air ever again, because there's no way I could screw up a broadcast any more than that first one. True story.
That reminds me, and that reminds me of, that pretty much set the barrier for you. You were the master of all at that point. And the same thing applies at the other end to the fellow with the microphone. As the talent, the broadcast person, the one on camera, you're supposed to always maintain your cool, regardless of what happens. It reminds me of being outside Fenway Park, opening day for the Red Sox, standing by to do what we call sidebar color. And I jabbered into what was going on inside the ballpark. The Red Sox, I believe, were losing that day. And as I was jabbering, I saw people walking out of the park. Apparently, the Red Sox were not doing well because these people were very unhappy. They were also very drunk. I didn't realize that at that point. But as I'm talking, they walked up behind me and they started waving their fist at me and tapping me in the back of the head. I introduced a piece of tape, and I turned around and I said, you fellas can't do that. Don't you realize that you will be on camera? You will be seen. Just don't do anything that's unorthodox. Just don't touch me, please. And they just looked at me, and I figured everything was okay. And I went back to preparing in my brain what I would say when the tape ended. Now, as the tape was reaching its climax, they started pounding on my back again, pounding on my back. I tried to push them away. And finally, someone whacked me on the back of my head. And I did what you're not supposed to do. I broke the cardinal rule. I turned around and I returned that blow. I just whacked the fellow in the face. And I heard someone say, you're live, you're live. Apparently, I had been caught on air fighting with the fans. I turned around and I tried to smile and say, well, it's a feisty day out there. And then they hit me again. And I turned around and hit them again. And then I wrapped up my shot. And I figured, as you did, that's the end of my career. We wrapped up the gear, headed back to the office, headed back to the building. And as the elevator was going up, I was trying to think, what in the world can I say to my boss? So the elevator doors open. And there stood my boss, and then behind him, you could see the people shaking their heads, indicating that that was the end of my career. My boss opened his arms, he smiled, and he said, Garry, that was great. That was a terrific live shot. That's what I want from my reporters. I want you to be action-filled. I want you to be able to go with the moment. That's terrific. And I want the rest of my staff to see what you just did today. That's the kind of stuff I want from my reporters. And I just...
Awesome. It's funny. When you started the story, my very first thought was, are you kidding? That's ratings gold. I mean,
yes,
do you realize that in today's day that clip would be viral on the internet?
It really would be.
Absolutely.
Let me staple right to the end of that. I was, a few years later, I was anchoring our Minority Affairs show. We had done all the pre-production, and we had time to go out for dinner. We were having fun at dinner. We think we were having Chinese food, but that's besides the point. But we had a food fight, and At the end of the food fight, we said, "Oh, we have to get back to the studio. It's showtime." We cleaned up, or so I thought. Fade out, fade in. The show is on, and I'm reading the script, and I'm going along smoothly. I remember I'm anchoring, and that wasn't my forte, but everything was going smoothly. But I could see behind the camera, I could see people laughing, and I couldn't quite figure out why. We cut to a commercial break, and one of the makeup people ran over and started brushing my hair. And I said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Garry, you have food in your hair. There's a carrot, there's some rice on the top of your head." And I said, "You mean you let me stay on the air and I had food in my hair?" And they said, "Yeah, I think we have some problems." And I said, "Well, we don't get many viewers for this show anyway, right?" And they said, "Well, Garry, I would be cool and calm about this." So I said, "Fine." Well, we went through the rest of the show with food still in my hair. We wrapped the show up. Phones rang after that, and there were some complaints about my appearance. And I got a call from one of the suits saying that's not what we expect from our talent. That was a Saturday night, and through Sunday, I really dreaded coming in Monday and really being dressed down by all of the suits. Well, I walked in. They had the newspapers stacked up on the desk, and they said, "Would you believe the ratings went through the roof for that show Saturday night, Garry? That was tremendous. We've been trying to figure a way to get ratings for that show. Minority Affairs never gets any ratings." So I'm thinking, do they want me to go through the rest of my career here with food in my hair? And
You know,
I looked at them for a moment, and you could see that they were actually thinking about it. So I went from being a fool on the air to being a hero, at least for one night.
oh my God. Well, you know what you could have done? Like end each show and somebody comes up and puts a pie in your face. That would have been
Oh, yeah.
gold.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. That's amazing. All right, changing gears. Um, Last week's show, which by the way, last week's show's been getting a lot of buzz. I'm really thrilled.
That's great.
I'm hearing from
That's,
people that I haven't heard from in a long time. They're enjoying it. We've been getting good reviews, and I can successfully say that we have been viewed by literally tens of people, and
that's amazing.
we're on our way to 1 million subscribers. All right, we only got 36, but that's on the way to 1 million subscribers. So anyway,
Tom, I think people still have this image of how glorious and how exciting and how smooth things are when they're watching the news, whether it's local or network, and they think everything is so perfect. And when
yes,
they hear stories behind the scenes,
yes.
that's another story.
Now, I've always said that, talent, the real thing that you are paid for, okay, is not just reporting the news, but the way you get your big bucks is that when everything goes to shit in the control room, you've got to stay on the air and ad lib until it gets fixed. And that's not an
Yes,
easy thing
yes,
to do.
yes. No, it
Um,
isn't.
I mean,
Case in point, it was 1988 or 89. Forgive me if I've lost the right year. But George Bush Sr. was vice president. He was arriving in Boston. His plane was circling over Logan Airport for weather problems, I guess. Now, I was a reporter at the scene, and my sole assignment was to fill time as the plane descended. Now, the anchor in the studio, who was a good friend, did his bit and threw it to me at Logan Airport. And I thought I had 30 seconds to describe what was happening, the plane's descension. Well, they had flight problems, and air control was having all aircraft circle Logan Airport. So what went from 30 seconds, it went on to be 3 minutes at that point. And I jabbered a few things from the copy that I had been given, and I threw it back to the studio. The anchor talked for 10 seconds and said, "We can see the plane is still circling. Garry Armstrong has more late breaking information." In truth, I had nothing at all. So I got it back, and I began with the plane is circling. There are problems from air traffic control. And I could hear in my ear, "Just keep talking, just keep talking, just keep talking." You absorb that, and you just continue talking. And I was saying things like, "Sources tell me, I have it on good authority, People have just indicated to me, and I went on and on and on, and I could see my crew to the, you have peripheral vision, and the crew is looking at me. Their mouths are wide open because they did not know from where I got the information. I was just babbling stuff. And I went on for 5, for 10, and I kept waiting for them to say, wrap it up. I couldn't hear wrap it up. I'm thinking, what else am I going to say? My mouth was moving. Almost unilaterally, my mouth was moving about. And as I heard from this source, and as I heard from this source, and sources close to the vice president have indicated, finally, 15 minutes at the least, I finally began to see the planes descend, and someone said, okay, you can wrap it up. And I think I said, I'm just getting started. And so I would have gone for the next 3 minutes. The plane landed. We're taking our gear off, and a couple of the competing reporters came over and said, we saw you talking way beyond after we had finished what we were saying. Where did you get your information? Who are your sources? And I said, well, as a professional, I can't share this with you.
And basically, what you're saying is
that was terrific.
Yeah, what you're saying is that you acquired the information rectally.
Yes. Those were unimpeachable sources. Those are the things that, you're so thankful that the brain keeps operating and it spits out things that are very questionable, shall we say.
Absolutely. Nowadays. Nowadays, unfortunately, cable news has made that into an art form. We have a story that we have literally 30 seconds of information on, and we're going to talk about it for the next 2 hours. Dan Rather actually sort of perfected that with the, we're now going to examine exactly what we don't know. And I used to sit in the control room laughing my ass off. I said, wow, we are very sure about what we don't know. And now we're going to tell it to you. And then they would go to the other correspondents, Scott Pelley. What don't you know? Well, there's a lot we don't know. And it would go on and on like that. Well, what's really the key here is that you and I were working at the time where we were among the first wave of fresh blood, young blood. We didn't come from the old school where they had scripts and they stuck to the script. And when the script was over, that was it. We knew that something could go wrong. And if something did go wrong, you just danced on the dime, as I like to put it, so that it just came naturally. It sounds heroic when we tell the story now, but we were used to being able to fill in the blanks, whatever came into our minds. It was hailed as being the skill of the new generation. What they didn't understand is you don't need any stinking script in a situation like that. You just keep talking and something else will happen. Well, that leads into a story that we're not going to get to today because we've run out of time, believe it or not. We've hit our half-hour mark. We have hit our half-hour mark. And again, we just didn't notice. It flew by so fast.
Pilgrim, we're going to have to save a big story for next week.
Yeah, I know. So, hey, but at least we have a teaser for next week. We were going to do a story about the first time that you met John Wayne, and we will get to that story next week. So we've done it again. Number 2. They said it wouldn't last. They said it wouldn't last. So, and of course, we of course have to plug your blog. There it is, right down there, Marilyn's blog that we all contribute to. Serendipity: Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth, which we can all agree is a fool's errand. And and of course, I encourage everybody to watch our sister podcast, Get Off My Lawn with Tom Curley, the show that talks about life, the universe, whatever the hell I want to talk about. So that's great, Gary. This has been so much fun. We'll see everybody next week. Just remember, click and subscribe or whatever the heck you're supposed to do on these sites, because I really don't know. See ya.